About the court case Loving v. Virginia. I'm Rachel. And then just to give context about the time, it occurred during the late 50s to early 1960s. During this time, the U.S. was experiencing a recession and large unemployment, but related to the civil rights movement, it was really prominent during this time. So 4 years prior to when it occurred, there was Brown v. Board of Education. There was the murder of Emmett Till 3 years prior. There was the Montgomery bus boycott, which, if you guys remember, that was also with Rosa Parks. There was a high school being integrated in 1957. There was also the Freedom Rides, and then the March on Washington in 1963, which is also like in the prime of when the Supreme Court case was occurring. And also a reminder, the March on Washington was when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. And then there was also the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was also during the time that the court case was going on. And then for the individuals involved, there was Mildred Dolores Jeter. She was born in 1939 in Virginia. She's believed to be of Native American and African American descent, but they also believe that she was potentially Portuguese as well. She was a homemaker and she was married to Richard Perry Loving. And then there was Richard Perry Loving, who was born in 1933 in Virginia. He identified as white, and his father also was a soldier in the fighting for the Confederacy. He was a construction worker, and he married Mildred Dolores Jeter. And then there was the state of Virginia. Their rule was Section 2058, which denied interracial marriage in Virginia. They described interracial marriage as a marriage between a colored person and a white person, but they didn't really have specifics. That was really the only definition of what that was. And then the state of Virginia also, when they were hearing their case, did not want Loving and Jeter to live together.
So, a little bit about the actual incident. The Lovings got married in Washington, D.C. in 1958, but they were residents of Virginia, and they were charged with violating Virginia's law against interracial marriage, which caused them to be sentenced to 1 year in jail, but they decided to argue their case in court. And this case calls into question the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and whether Virginia's law against interracial marriage violated this clause. And this is an example of an anti-miscegenation law, which is a law that enforces racial segregation at the level of marriage and intimate relationships by criminalizing interracial marriage and sometimes also sex between members of different races. And then the definition of miscegenation is the interbreeding of people considered to be of different racial types.
So moving on to the different court hearings that happened. So it first started at the Virginia State Court in 1959, in which the Lovings pleaded guilty for violating the anti-miscegenation statute. And as Elizabeth said, they were sentenced to 1 year in jail, or they had to leave Virginia for 25 years. And then later, at the Virginia State Court in 1963, they filed a suit to overturn the original conviction. And this was rejected because the State Court of Appeals said that since the anti-miscegenation laws didn't violate the Equal Protection Clause and it applied to both white and colored people the same, that it wasn't discriminatory. And then later, ACLU lawyers took the case to the Virginia State Court of Appeals. And so as I just said, they upheld the constitutionality of the anti-miscegenation laws. And but they overturned the sentences, so the Lovings could return to Virginia. And then they appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1967. The opposing side argued that these anti-miscegenation laws are similar to regulations against incest and polygamy. They also argued that, as I said before, it didn't violate the Equal Protection Clause. But Chief Justice Earl Warren of the Supreme Court stated that the laws were rooted in racism. So the final decision was that the court unanimously overturned the conviction. They deemed Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws as unconstitutional in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice Earl Warren stated that marriage is a civil right, and this this decision ended prohibitions on interracial marriage.
So, for the significance of this case, it was that they declared the Virginia's anti-miscegenation law unconstitutional because of the 14th Amendment. Virginia's law denied the fundamental freedoms to marry, so it was like a big thing for Virginia to get this law removed. The Lovings appealed for Supreme Court after they pleaded guilty in the state court and were also suspended from Virginia for 25 years. And once the 25 years were over, they could not return together. And the final verdict was the Lovings' criminal conviction was overturned, and these laws were all laws against interracial marriage were struck down, which happened to be in 16 other states.
And then this is our works cited slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
You.